Good afternoon and welcome to Adopting the Right Data Center and Cloud Solution for Your Business webinar, presented by Rogers and IDC Canada. I'm James Tantrum, Director of Product Management for Rogers Data Centers. I'm accountable for accelerating Canada's journey to the cloud, helping our customers realize the business benefits of digital transformation that are enabled through the adoption of hybrid IT solutions and that integrate traditional co-location, hosted cloud, and hyperscaler technologies. I'll be moderating today's webinar, and I'm joined by two distinguished guests today. First is Keith Clavitt, Director of Innovation and Technology at Core Solutions. Keith leads Core Solutions' customer engagement team, leading their clients from concept through to go live to produce custom software solutions that improve their clients' efficiency in any operational environment. He's here to share his experience with digital transformation, specifically the learnings that Core Solutions realized in terms of their journey from on-prem to the hyperscaler cloud, and looking beyond simple time and budget KPIs in really driving a business and customer outcome in terms of their cloud adoption journey. Keith will introduce what Core Solutions is about, customers that you serve, and what they drive in terms of critical success factors in terms of technology and planning. I'm also joined by Megha Kumar, Director of Research and Software at IDC Canada. Megha heads Cloud Service Research, and as a research director, Megha is responsible for managing and delivering projects across technology areas such as cloud, enterprise applications, software, and digital transformation for the Canadian market. Megha will kick off today's webinar by helping us understand what digital transformation is really about. What are some of the key drivers of digital transformation in Canada? And what are the most common business outcomes that are desired from digital transformation initiatives? We'll explore how the role of IT is evolving from simply managing devices and technology to truly supporting the outcomes of business stakeholders. And finally, how do hybrid IT environments leveraging multi-cloud architectures really help enable and support an organization's digital transformation? We encourage anyone in the audience and joining us today to submit any questions over the webinar. We'll moderate a Q&A at the end of today's session. Thank you, Megha.
Thank you so much for the introduction, James. Today I'll be presenting about how you can adopt a hybrid or a multi-cloud strategy to avoid the storm of clouds, right? You want to think about how you can actually streamline and manage your cloud environment. But before I talk a bit more about cloud and a bit more about digital transformation, as James mentioned, I would like to talk about how organizations traditionally delivered IT and business agility. A lot of it had to do around data centers. Organizations within Canada invested heavily in building out data centers in a bid to improve resiliency, in a bid to ensure that they were able to make applications largely available. The fact of the matter is that a lot of the traditional data center architecture is actually built out to support on-premise applications. It is built out for traditional networks. And increasingly, as organizations transform, they demand far more scalability, flexibility, and availability out of their data center footprint. And this has led to a lot of organizations to start thinking about cloud. And a lot of this is largely driven by the fact that increasingly organizations are looking towards how they can actually adopt new types of business and operational models to enable innovation so that they're able to think about introducing new types of experiences as well as new types of offerings to their customers. And they also want to be able to leverage technology to identify new revenue streams and bring in innovation at the core. This is what we within IDC term as digital transformation, where organizations are able to leverage third platform technologies such as cloud, mobility, big data analytics, coupled with innovation accelerators such as artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, AR/VR, to bring about a change within the organization so that they are able to stay relevant not only to their competition but also to their customers at large. Now, what is driving this transformation? If we look at what are the major drivers for digital transformation within your organization, you might be an organization that decided that you needed to transform because you had to comply with new or existing regulations that have come about within your sector. Or maybe transformation was driven largely because you wanted to become far more efficient around costs. Or you were driven by the need that you wanted to become a more effective business. You also wanted to innovate, or you wanted to improve your operational efficiency. Another major driver for the transformation within your organization might have been because of the fact that you wanted to respond to competitive pressures and threats, or increasingly, you wanted to improve your customer service and experience. If we had to look at digital transformation, a lot of organizations in Canada are allocating budgets towards transformation technologies. Nearly 20% of Canadian budgets over the last 12 months were dedicated towards DX technologies. And this attribution towards transformation is going to reach 31% by 2021. When we spoke to IT and business decision makers earlier this year in Canada, a lot of them indicated that when it came to drivers for transformation, they were looking at improving their customer experience. They wanted to reduce cost. They wanted to improve operational efficiencies, and more importantly, create an effective business. When we look at all the technologies that organizations are leveraging when it comes to transformation, our research shows that cloud is a major strategic priority when it comes to digital transformation, ahead of technologies such as big data and analytics, mobility, IoT, and even cognitive systems. And in many cases, cloud is also an enabler of this transformation. And why are organizations leaning towards cloud services? If we look at what are the top reasons for organizations utilizing cloud, a lot of it aligns with what is it that they want to achieve out of transformation. They're looking towards operational efficiencies. They want to be able to drive business innovation. And they're also hoping that they can better manage their risk within the organization. Increasingly, what we are seeing is that end users are also shifting their IT budgets towards cloud services. By 2021, we expect nearly 48% of IT budget to be allocated towards cloud services. This can be either to drive innovation or also for keeping the lights on. Increasingly, what we are seeing is that when it comes to transformation and the role of cloud and data centers, we are going to see a systematic approach towards this. Increasingly, the role of the data center is going to be to ingest, deliver, and exploit data to support digital transformation. Organizations want to be able to use cloud to supplement data centers and actually provide them with agility, and also be able to leverage third-party data centers to drive future IT agility as well. There also needs to be a realignment in terms of the facilities and network to meet a growing demand for mobile and analytical workloads. A key shift that is taking place is the fact that IT's role is drastically changing. It is no longer limited to just managing devices, but the job of IT is to be able to deliver the resource needed by the business to achieve operational goals. And the CIO clearly plays a very critical role, especially in trying to help the organization decide the right type of cloud deployment model or where a workload needs to run on the cloud. For example, a CFO might decide that they need to leverage a private cloud environment given the critical nature of the data that they're utilizing. Whereas a line of business leader, such as a chief marketing officer, might actually want to lean more towards a public cloud services environment because they want to make their workloads far more accessible to a distributed team. In some cases, depending on the mission criticality of the data and the application, organizations might increasingly lean towards a hybrid cloud deployment model, where they're able to leverage the benefits of both an on-premises environment as well as a cloud environment. And what this leads to is the fact that most organizations are going to be a complex mix of hybrid and multi-cloud environments. that need to be managed effectively. When you're defining your cloud strategy, you want to probably think about, based on the type of workload that you have, the type of data that you have within your organization, you want to evaluate what is the right kind of cloud adoption or deployment model that you would require. For example, you might have mission-critical data. For this, you might want to ensure that it stays on premises on a private cloud environment that you're able to better control and manage. Or given the fact that you don't have the right skill sets in-house, you would probably want to look at leveraging a services provider support to manage your cloud environment. In some cases, depending on how accessible the data needs to be, or the fact that you want to be able to scale and leverage flexibility, you might actually want to move into a public cloud services environment. And the reality of the matter is that most customer environments are not going to be limited to having or standardizing on a single cloud deployment model. Nearly 65% of the clouds that organizations wish to adapt are largely going to be hybrid or multi-cloud in nature. And this hybrid and multi-cloud environment can be a combination of some workloads being on-premise private clouds to hosted private cloud environments. In some cases, it might be different public clouds actually running in the environment. In some cases, it might be an on-premise private cloud and the workload being connected to a public cloud at large. Why is this? Why is it that organizations have realized that they need to have this multi-cloud hybrid environment? A lot of it has to do with the fact that as organizations mature, they realize that their cloud environment needs to be better managed and better controlled. And in some cases, organizations have actually had to repatriate some workloads from public cloud environments to actually back onto either an on-premise or a private cloud ecosystem. Our studies within IDC have shown that nearly 80% of customers tend to repatriate their workloads from public cloud. This can be attributed to the fact that as they mature in their cloud adoption and migration journey, they realize what is the right environment for a workload within the organization. And by actually going hybrid and multi-cloud, it enables two-directional workload migration. As IDC, we expect 50% of public cloud applications are expected to be repatriated over the next 2 years. And within our studies, if we look at what are the drivers for repatriation, a lot of it has to do around security and performance. When organizations mature and they realize what is the type of security standards we want to apply for the data that is sitting inside the cloud, and what are the different types of security policies that we actually want to ensure that we adopt. Other factors include cost and control, the fact that you want to avoid a lock-in with a particular kind of cloud provider, and also the cost of the utilization of cloud. Along with that, a reduction in shadow IT. So increasingly, what I would like to emphasize over here is that as organizations mature in their cloud journey, their initial notion might have been to move an application to do a lift and shift onto public cloud services. But as they mature, they begin to realize that certain workloads might actually run far more effectively in a different type of cloud environment, which has led to a repatriation of that workload either on-premise or onto a private cloud or a hybrid cloud environment. Now, around data sovereignty and jurisdiction and even security, if we think about it, a lot of times organizations tend to adopt a policy where they first move the workload onto the cloud and then think about security. So the notion is that they tend to think about or treat security as an afterthought while moving applications onto the cloud. Some of our research shows that a lot of organizations go ahead, you see very heavy adopters of software as a service, followed by infrastructure as a service as well as PaaS. However, a lot of these adopters, only 37% actually have thought about shared responsibility, and only 32% have actually put cloud security policies in place. What this tells you is that a lot of times organizations complete or are very late in realizing that they need to account for shared responsibility when it comes to workloads on the cloud. Managing data security falls not just with the cloud provider, but also rests with the organization itself. And also, you have to take compliance into account. This might be a sector-level compliance. It might also be a federal-level compliance that has been put into place. So organizations actually have to move away from thinking about security later, but actually build in security from the get-go when they decide to migrate onto cloud. The reality of the matter is that a lot of organizations are going to be impacted by a cloud sprawl. They're going to have multiple clouds running within their environments. Some of these will be public cloud services, some of them will be private, and some of them will be hybrid. But what is required to avoid this complexity is to have a clear hybrid and multi-cloud strategy in place. And for that, I would like you all to think about a few things. Firstly, think about what is lurking in the shadows. And by this, I mean, think about what are the different kinds of workloads that you're actually running within your shadow IT environment. Another aspect that I would also like you to consider is also think about all the different types of security issues that you might have lurking in your shadows due to the lack of compliance or due to the lack of having security policies in place. Be very proactive in addressing your cloud sprawl because it will have a huge financial impact as well as a business impact. And this relates very closely to the fact that a lot of you are thinking about costs. Make sure that you create a transparency team with executive support. Lines of business actually require cloud to achieve their business goals, and they have to be transparent with IT with regards to how they're utilizing these workloads. As you're building out your strategy, look at what are the current cloud services that you have in place and think about what is the roadmap that you would like to plan out. Cost is obviously top of mind, and think about how much you're going to spend on cloud and how much you're going to be spending on rolling out and integration. And more importantly, as you mature, review and think about how you're going to optimize your cloud usage. Another critical factor to think about when we are building out a hybrid or a multi-cloud strategy is around skills. A lot of organizations do not have access to the right skill sets at times that they need in terms of building out a transformational environment. And this is where, as an organization, you would probably want to lean towards a partner or a service provider who's actually going to help you better build out your cloud environment. And when you're thinking about a service provider, there are three things that we would like you to consider. Lean towards a service provider who's able to support your expansion of a hybrid and multi-cloud roadmap. Someone who's able to help you make your roadmap a reality. Look for a service provider who has the right kind of technology, who has the right kind of talent. As I mentioned, skills are very critical, and who also are able to bring in the right kind of relationship support to ensure success with regards to your transformational goals. And lastly, as I said, keep security top of mind. Lean towards a provider who can actually help you better secure your data and, more importantly, meet your compliance needs. And with that, thank you all for listening in, and I would like to hand it back over to James.
Thank you, Megha, for sharing your perspective on digital transformation. And I think critically that changing role of IT and the need for IT leaders to take on accountability and leadership in terms of understanding and driving business outcomes. Attributes such as control, cost, compliance. We've all seen today how critical those are to the business as they embark on their digital transformation story. And I think, just in conclusion, leaving us with how to partner to really ensure digital transformation and cloud adoption success was a key takeaway for me. So I'd like to transition away from sort of the academic and theory into a real-world example and experience in the context of digital transformation. Keith Clavitt really is going to walk us through his real-world experience in terms of what digital transformation looked like for him, what the drivers were, and what his experience was in terms of cloud adoption, and ultimately how that experience has shaped his organization's long-term cloud strategy. Keith?
Thank you, James. I want to first off by saying that was a great presentation and the research there. If I'd had that 8 years ago, I would have avoided a lot of pain to this today. But then again, if that never happened, I never would have been invited by Rogers. So I want to thank Rogers for having me here today. In case you're wondering why they've invited me, I know James gave a high-level overview, but we've been a software company and we've been around for about 30 years. We've gone from a desktop to the cloud, and we've seen and made just about every challenge and opportunity, and even some mistakes along the way. So about 8 years ago, when this story really begins, is when we were still an on-prem company. And to make this story clear, we go from on-prem to co-location to cloud to hypercloud and back to a hybrid environment. And that's the story I'm going to share today. So back in the days of the on-prem environment, so we have the servers in the building, we have that very expensive pipe. As you can imagine, 8 years ago, nothing was cheap and the bandwidth was minor. So we were putting big dollars out the door to get the pipe in. How big did the pipe need to be? Well, let me tell you a bit about the solution we were supporting back then. Although we do mostly custom and desktop environments back in the day, we did have a software as a service offering called PD Place. This product was used by school boards all across Canada, the US, and a whole slew of different local governments to actually manage professional development within their organizations. So at one point we had well over 100,000 users on there at any given time. And we were pushing all that through, again, commercial pipe into our offices and our servers. That meant we had to have the people on site who can manage the architecture and environment, and that was not our core business. Our core business was software. So we spent a lot of time and resources managing that environment. So at that time, we started to look around for opportunities where we did, because if you think about the school boards and the governments that we served, a lot of the data did have to stay within Canada. And in those days, there wasn't a whole lot of opportunities to get that data to the cloud. But Rogers actually opened a data center right near us within our home office in London, Ontario. So we saw the opportunity to co-locate. That was perfect. The first aspect of co-location was cost. We got to get rid of our heavy expense pipe. We had to move it out to the Rogers Center where we can rely on their pipe. Now let me talk a bit about relying on the pipe and relying on the hardware itself. It doesn't matter how good our software is or how much we developed it. The end user at the end of the day is the one who's going to tell us whether it works or not. And if the hardware is failing, they're not going to tell me whether it's the hardware or the software. They're just going to see it's failing. So even the best software in the world, supported by poor hardware and poor environments, it's just not going to deliver the solution that they wanted. So that was a key driver for us moving to that environment, was to improve their experience. So we set up our servers at the Coloco Center. Experience improved. No measurements back then. We were just happy that we had better performance and better reliability for our customers. But the problem still existed that the hardware was ours. So when there were issues or we were required to be on site, we had to drive across town to get our technicians there to address issues. Not that Rogers wouldn't do things, but they could only do so much with our servers, and we could only give them so much access to those servers. So we still had a little of the reliance on the actual technical expertise. Let's fast forward about 18 months later. We had a fairly stable environment. We were probably 90% for reliability, so we're feeling pretty good. But now we're looking at a world in which we are now developing those web solutions, custom web solutions. As you can see from the slide on the screen, a wide range of industries at this point, a wide range of solutions. And a lot of them had on-prem, but they were looking to this cloud model. Again, we're looking around all the cloud service providers in the US. We contact Rogers, who we'd already had a relationship with, and sure enough, they started to offer virtual environments where we could start to put our services up. Ideal for 3 reasons. One is no more hardware procurement, no more hardware movement, and no more hardware management. It's all become managed by Rogers. That meant I could actually free up resources from the infrastructure side, and I could move them into the software side, where our strengths were. So as Rogers was incredible in helping us onboard our services there, standing up those virtual environments, we were able to now spin up environments quickly and easily for those custom customers as they came on board. And lo and behold, now we're back to the 99 and change reliability. Perfect. It's now, if there's any issues, it's our software, so we can take ownership over it now. So we lived in this environment for about 1.5 years, and now we're talking about a world where hypercloud and like getting it up in the cloud was becoming a thing. People could see it was cheaper and better. But the problem is no one had a lot of experience with it. And the cost was still something that was a competitive issue. Rogers now, again, when we reach out to them, had started a partnership with a French company, sorry, I should say French company, right, with data centers within Canada. This partnership offered us a hypercloud environment, cheaper, faster spin-up environment that would be competitive for our customers to help them move to the cloud. So we were actually there was enabling technology to help them get out of those data centers they had and move into this kind of environment that we could help manage. But I'll tell you something quickly about some of the self-serving factors behind this. One is, when I lean back on that whole software experience, right, this meant that we had control over the environment, that we knew what the servers were like, and we knew how it would deploy, so we could guarantee a better experience for our customers. Secondly, is our ability to meet our response times. Right? So we obviously had contractual response times to get things spun up when there were issues, so we knew we still had control over this. So as the business grew, we knew we still maintained that control. Because I can tell you, whenever we had clients with on-prem, and still do today, on-prem solutions, we do lose a lot of control, and it takes a lot more pain for our customers to get them back up when they go down. Even if it's not us, we jump in to help out. One thing, though, is that I mentioned it was a partnership with Rogers. The hypercloud environment, not as much support as we would like. So while we could get in there remotely, reliably, to get to issues, any deep issues that would have required a Rogers technology expert before, was now relying on this third party. We were no longer seeing that kind of responsiveness that we wanted. So again, we did save some money. We did manage to move our clients to the cloud, but ultimately, our whole driver initially, which is giving better experience, was not happening. So we ended up talking to Rogers again about bringing it back, almost repatriating to original Rogers environment. But before this decision was made, we thought about some other experiences we were having during this whole time. Well, if you think about our environment, for those of you who are in development or have done anything with software before, it goes through multi-stages before it sees the cloud. So we had custom dev environments for our team. We had quality assurance environments. We had all these other environments. And if I go back to this pipe conversation, all this was going through this pipe up to the cloud. That pipe, if there was any issues, we were down. We were down online, and we were down in-house. So we took this opportunity to relook at our whole strategy of how we're going to move forward. So this is when we come to the hybrid environment. We actually did put some servers back in-house, but only for development and quality assurance. This way we could, no matter what was going on in the world outside our doors, we had full control over our team being able to keep moving forward. Now, let me talk about moving back to this cloud environment from the hypercloud environment. Rogers realized that there was going to be a challenge with this. Unlike before, where we could just copy and move over and start a whole new world, we could not come back with a copy and paste. We actually had to rebuild the servers, move the data, rebuild everything. So you can imagine what that was going to look like for hundreds of clients trying to come back to to a whole new environment. It was going to be downtime. I can't even tell you that roadmap we tried to figure out who to bring up when and what it was going to look like. But I have to admit that Rogers did come to the rescue. They put some of their most senior techs on there to come in and figure out ways to backpedal and bring that data back without us having to rebuild everything. And anything that did need to be rebuilt, Rogers took that on for us. So they were able to rebuild those environments, copy the data back, and get us up and running with minimal impact to our client. It was a lot of work for us, and it was a lot of work for Rogers, but the key was that during that whole experience, our customers were not affected the way we thought they might be. Let's fast forward about 18 months since that time. Honestly, it's been the perfect breed, that hybrid environment. Our team in-house, no matter what the problems are in the world, we're still able to keep working, and we know that while we're working in-house, our data centers are working for us, and we can move new clients on board in hours with this environment. So that's pretty much our story from our side. I'd like to thank you for inviting me today, and I want to mention that the key of all this is the relationship support we've gotten from Rogers. So with that, can I hand that back over to you, James?
Thank you, Keith, for sharing really your cloud journey with us today. What I really found fascinating was really the different benefits and trade-offs that Core Solutions had incurred at really every step of that journey, starting really with the on-prem and co-location model, where you had absolute control over every aspect of your IT environment. As you moved into really a Rogers hosted cloud, getting the benefits of transitioning into a virtualized environment and moving to a OpEx as opposed to a CapEx model. And then ultimately, in the hyperscaler environment, really getting the agility and elasticity of the hyperscaler clouds, but with the trade-off of support in the context of those types of environments. And then ultimately how Core Solutions really landed on that hybrid IT model and leveraging really the right consumption model for the needed business outcomes, and whether that's on-prem for your development teams or a hosted cloud for your customer environments. I'd like to end today's session with just a few final thoughts in the context of how Rogers Data Centers helps our customers, and I think really substantiated some of the benefits of working with Rogers today. I think first and foremost, Rogers from a cloud and data center perspective, we are really about flexibility and control, and recognizing that multiple consumption models exist, and that a hybrid IT will really be the long-term sort of architectural state for businesses and organizations across Canada. And so what that means from Rogers is that we have multiple modalities, if you will, in terms of supporting co-location, private cloud, virtual private cloud, as well as the ability to interconnect those solutions into the hyperscalers where that elasticity is required. The second element of Rogers' vision for data center and cloud services really resides around cost predictability. Cost remains one of the top drivers for repatriation from a hyperscaler cloud perspective. Rogers is committed to being transparent around our billing models and the simplicity of our billing in order to ensure that costs can be forecast and budgeted from a cloud perspective. And more importantly, Rogers Cloud Services never incur any transit or I/O costs in terms of accessing or uploading your data to the cloud. And so that really allows us to be transparent with our costs. From a support and services perspective, all of our products really are built around a fully supported and managed essentially model, where every product we sell comes with the technical as well as account support to ensure that you as a customer are successful, not just on your onboarding and adoption, but also in terms of your longer term management and success. And then finally, from a data security and a data policy perspective, because Rogers is a 100% Canadian entity, we are able to provide and guarantee data sovereignty and data residency in terms of our solutions. And that really ensures that your data, when it sits within a Rogers data center, does not fall within any foreign jurisdiction in the context of access to that data. And that certainly helps in terms of complying with certain local regulations in the context of data sovereignty and data residency. So with that, that concludes our session today. We'd like to open up the floor to questions, and we've got a couple of them on the webinar today. First one is really around what are some of the parameters in terms of regulatory compliance that we should be aware of when choosing a cloud strategy. And I'll frame up that question just because we've ended on the data sovereignty angle here. I think in the context of planning that digital transformation story and successfully adopting cloud services, Megha really highlighted that the approach today has very much been a sort of adopt and secure. And I think the key to meeting certainly your regulatory and security requirements is to understand the nature of the workloads and data that you're looking to migrate and transition to cloud, and really understand what are the actual compliance and security needs of that data. Data sovereignty and data residency remains sort of a front-of-mind topic for many Canadian enterprises. We did see in the U.S. last year, as a result of the U.S. Cloud Act, that by U.S. law, it no longer matters where data is resident. Essentially, if the owner of the data center or of the cloud services is a U.S.-based entity, it essentially means that no matter where that data is globally, that data is subject to U.S. jurisdiction and law, and that now sits within, as a U.S. law. And that for Canadian businesses, if we're talking about personal information or protected data, that's a strong driver to ensure that your data is hosted and managed within a data center that does fall under Canadian jurisdiction, meaning owned and operated by a Canadian service provider. So that's from my point of view, some of the key considerations. Meg, is there anything that you would add to that, or Keith?
Well, I think one factor to also take into account is also something that we discussed earlier today, James, that has to how organizations are actually going to secure their data and also be compliant not just at a federal level, but also at a provincial level, in addition to a sector level as well. So I think organizations need to also keep that in mind when they're actually moving their workloads onto a cloud deployment model.
Perfect. Next question is really in the context of when moving to the cloud, what are some of the organizational or business challenges to first consider? What are some of the factors there? And I think, again, sort of citing Megha in the context of, cloud for many organizations has been the outcome that they've been looking to achieve. And so it's very much been a sort of execute and then understand, the business priorities after the fact. Right. And, from my point of view, cloud is a technology outcome. It's fascinating, but in itself, it doesn't necessarily provide value to the business. And so, it really goes back to understanding, what are the elements of agility, elasticity, control, compliance, and really ensuring that in terms of that cloud adoption sort of strategy, that ultimately you're able to achieve, what it is that the business is looking for from that cloud and digital transformation strategy.
Right. And, James, to add to that, I think a few of the other challenges that organizations do deal with is what are the data sets that are actually going to move on to the cloud? A lot of times organizations end up having an environment where there are a lot of data silos, so they have to do a lot of homework in terms of data classification, tagging that data, and realizing what is the security standards that this data has to comply with. And I think another factor that organizations face is this whole notion around skill sets within the environment. So this is where organizations need to take stock as to what are the type of skills we have in terms of helping us manage our cloud environment, or they have to look outwards and look towards a partner or a provider who can actually help them in terms of those skills, right? These are other factors that they also need to consider.
I think something I kind of mentioned during my piece of it is that, it's allowing a company to focus on its core competencies, right? Because ours is not infrastructure, it was software. And as I've worked with hundreds of companies, helping them establish those environments, if you have too much of your non-core activities happening in your business, such as managing an infrastructure, you're not putting the money into the software solutions or even other areas of the business, getting new equipment, new machinery that's going to make you more efficient, more productive. So again, it's enabling to put that money where your business needs it so that you can do a little better. And that's what freeing up those environments will do for you.
Absolutely. I think the last question here is really related to growth and scale. And so my business is growing rapidly year over year. How can I ensure that my cloud provider is meeting my growing needs? And I think, again, this is really a business outcome-oriented question. And so, the way I would approach this is in the context of understanding how quickly you're growing, how quickly you need to scale out. Is there any seasonality in terms of consumption? Do you need to scale back at points of time within the year? And so ultimately, sort of those patterns of consumption will allow you to choose, as an organization, the right consumption model for your business. And if consumption tends to be quite linear and is growing predictably, then operating a co-location or private cloud environment may longer term provide you the right level of control and flexibility at a cost benefit to a hyperscaler cloud. If you're growing very rapidly and unpredictably, there's seasonality in that growth, then the ability with a hyperscaler cloud to scale out very quickly, but scale back when demand potentially doesn't materialize or when demand maybe dwindles over some seasonal period, a hyperscaler may be your best approach. And so it really is sort of going back to what is the needs of the business, understanding the growth patterns, and then landing that workload and application in the cloud that's most suited to that, that workload's characteristics.
And James, to your point, I think I would also add that, organizations, when you're building out your cloud strategy, you also have to define or put up a set of KPIs by which you're going to measure the success. Consumption, as James rightfully pointed out, is a major KPI. How much of the cloud are you consuming? You also want to think about things like availability. You also want to think about latency as well. So put in a few KPIs in place so that you're actually able to evaluate what is the right kind of environment for the workloads within your organization. Keith?
No, that was perfect, actually.
Great.
So that brings us to the conclusions of our questions. Just going to see if there's any more on the webinar. We will be following up with presentation material and content, so thank you for that question. And with that, I would like to again thank my guests today. Oh, I think we have one more question. How are we seeing cloud adoption growing in healthcare? So I'll answer that one quickly. I think cautiously would be sort of the experience that we've seen as Rogers. And that largely has been due to really the nature of healthcare workloads in the context of there being personally identifiable information that is typically being handled, patient data. And what that's meant from a Rogers standpoint is that we have seen robust demand for solutions that are able to meet the data sovereignty and data residency requirements of healthcare and sort of patient record providers. So there is very much a need to, depending on the province, to ensure that that data in fact stays within provincial jurisdiction. And of course, with that said, is not subject to a jurisdiction outside of a specific province. Again, when you think of the nature of any workload, and particularly healthcare, there is a desire as well to ensure that we're delivering the availability and high availability to workloads as well. And so being able to do that in a way that has multiple data centers that allow for that geo-redundancy and geodiversity within a single jurisdiction, that's been a key requirement for healthcare providers in Canada. So those are some of the things to really look for in the context of starting to plan that digital transformation journey and cloud adoption story is really going back to what are the key considerations and compliance needs for the business, and ensuring that we're not transitioning and then trying to implement the policies after the fact. Understanding nature of the data, whether there is personal information or patient data records that are part of the workloads, and then ensuring that from a cloud provider perspective or a data center provider perspective, that those compliance needs can be met.
I can tell you from my side, to actually talk to healthcare itself, I can break it down to two camps from the custom software: hospitals and then standalone clinics. So hospitals, we don't get the data outside of their environment. We go on site to work with it. They just do not free it up, right? So I don't see any sort of quick motion to the cloud with that. But more for private clinics and more people who are experts in their area, they're actually moving more into the cloud environment where they're trying to sell their services on a larger scale. So we're actually building solutions to help them move outside of that confined world. It doesn't mean that we don't have special restrictions and environments which to control the personal data or the healthcare data related to that person, but a lot of the rest of it we do allow to go out into the cloud and free it up so that they can share their knowledge more and share their expertise more. So again, hospitals, lockdown, the private sector of healthcare starting to really get wide open.
Right. And also I think this is within the healthcare sector in general. While both James and Keith, you've highlighted this whole notion around how data needs to be treated and how a lot of within the healthcare sector, you see a lot of organizations leaning towards a hybrid approach, especially when they want to try and introduce advancements into some of their services. So they need to lean towards edge computing, especially if they want to do improved patient monitoring and so forth. So those are places where we actually see the adoption of cloud taking place, where they actually want to ensure that there's more agility in the way the system actually responds to patient care.
Perfect. Thank you, Megha. So with that, I'd like to thank our two guests, Keith Clavitt from Core Solutions, Megha Kumar from IDC Canada, and of course myself, James Tantrum from Rogers Data Centers. I'd like the audience very much for your participation today in the context of Q&A at the end of today's session. Thank you very much.